Emotional IQ of authoritarian leaders. Do you want to understand the authoritarian leader? Don't look for a noble mind burdened by difficult choices. What you will find, staring back from the angry abyss, is a chilling blend of psychological dysfunction, narcissism, sociopathy, and outright psychopathy. These aren't just personality quirks. They are the bedrock upon which empires of cruelty are built, cloaked in false righteousness. Nowadays, we often hear about emotional IQ, emotional intelligence, or EI. Think of EI as your ability to understand your own feelings and manage them. Now, just as crucially, this is also your ability to understand and handle the feelings of others. EI is about empathy, self-awareness, knowing how to calm yourself down, emotional regulation, openness to feedback, and being good at navigating social situations. These are the qualities that help you be a good friend, a great teammate, or even a truly inspiring leader. Authoritarian leaders, just like predatory animals, possess little emotional intelligence. They understand emotions only as levers to manipulate, as weaknesses to exploit, or as obstacles to crush. Their empathy is hollow, their self-awareness is a distorted mirror reflecting only their perfection back at themselves. Let's dissect the emotional IQ of authoritarian leaders past and present. Part 1. First, let's discuss the gaping jaws of narcissism. This isn't just vanity, it's a pathological self-obsession, a desperate need for adoration that consumes all in its path. The authoritarian leader must be seen as infallible, omniscient, and supremely powerful. Any dissent, any criticism, any inconvenient truth is not merely an error, but an existential threat to their inflated self-image. It's why they surround themselves with sycophants, why state media becomes a constant, deafening hymn of praise. Their vision, however delusional, must be universally embraced. They are, as Mussolini declared, the embodiment of the state, because their ego demands it. Mussolini said, "The 20th century will be the century of fascism," in a narcissistic prophecy. This boundless narcissism feeds directly into their profound lack of empathy. They don't feel for others because others exist merely as instruments for their grand designs. The suffering of millions is just a statistic, a necessary sacrifice for a greater good, but this greater good is just them. Adolf Hitler could pontificate about the purity of the Aryan race, while systematically planning the extermination of millions. His chilling indifference was not a flaw in his plan, but an intrinsic component of it. He saw the non-Aryan people as a mass of born slaves who feel the need of a master, a view that stripped them of all humanity, making their enslavement and annihilation a logical rather than abhorrent outcome. Joseph Stalin, epically devoid of human social feelings, famously quipped, "The death of one man is a tragedy, the death of a million is a statistic." This isn't just a cynical observation, it's the creed of a psychopath for whom human lives are interchangeable data points in a ledger of power. He orchestrated famines that killed millions in Ukraine, the Holodomor, not out of malice, but out of a cold, calculating drive to break the spirit of a population and consolidate agricultural control. This brings us to the aforementioned sociopathy and psychopathy, which are the darker, more dangerous aspects of the authoritarian psyche. They are both associated with antisocial personality disorder, ASPD. A violent sociopathic ruler operates without guilt or remorse, driven by self-interest and a profound disregard for the rights of others. A psychopath, more chilling still, is born without the capacity for empathy, often displaying impulsivity and a superficial charm that masks a terrifying inner void. The authoritarian leader can exhibit traits of both. They are master manipulators, weaving narratives of external threats and internal purity to rally a terrified populace. They are incredibly skilled at exploiting fear and grievance. This isn't emotional intelligence. It's a sophisticated understanding of how to exploit human emotions. Pol Pot, under the Khmer Rouge, embarked on a social engineering project that murdered nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population. His detached cruelty wasn't an accident, it was the cold, unfeeling implementation of a twisted ideology. He said basically that what is good is bad, and what is bad is good. This philosophical inversion is the hallmark of a mind unmoored from conventional morality and capable of rationalizing any atrocity. The authoritarian leader's emotional regulation is often a terrifyingly controlled performance, punctuated by strategic, theatrical outbursts designed to instill fear and obedience. Hitler's notorious rages were not always uncontrolled. They were often calculated tools to dominate his subordinates. Conversely, when confronted with dissent or failure, Hitler's rage could be genuinely unbridled and destructive as the fragile facade of his self-importance shattered. The authoritarian leader's resistance to feedback is absolute because true self-awareness would dismantle the narcissistic delusion. To admit error is to admit weakness, and weakness is to be denounced in their cult of personality. This is why opposition is not merely disagreed with, but demonized and eliminated. When dictator Nicolae Ceausescu faced the Romanian Revolution, he seemed genuinely bewildered by the people's fury. Living the life of luxury while his people suffered in poverty, he had created such a hermetically sealed bubble of self-praise that the reality of his people's suffering was simply unthinkable. His final speech, bewildered and desperate, trying to command a rebellious crowd, was the ultimate display of a leader utterly disconnected from the people he crushed. Part 2. Kim Jong-un today continues this tyrannical legacy in North Korea, where every aspect of life is meticulously controlled and every thought scrutinized. The state is all and the individual is nothing, and Un is the state. Consider Vladimir Putin. His relentless pursuit of power, his casual disregard for international law, and the brutal suppression of dissidents within Russia, radiation poisoning anyone, all point to a deeply entrenched psychopathic disregard for human rights. The invasion of Ukraine, the systematic targeting of civilians, the chilling willingness to sacrifice countless lives for a geopolitical chess game, are not the actions of a leader enlightened by empathy. These are the actions of one cold, calculating tyrant driven by a singular will to dominate. His insistence on a multipolar world order, with Russia at its centre, reflect a grandiose self-image. And then there's Xi Jinping of China, the Great Firewall, the ubiquitous surveillance, the social credit system, the systematic internment of Uyghurs in re-education camps. These are not policies of a nuanced, balanced leader. They are the deliberate, cold-blooded mechanisms of total control where the individual is subordinated entirely to the will of the party. It's a system designed by twisted, empty hearts that see human beings as units to be managed, not as souls to be uplifted. Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela has been burdened with severe economic and social crises. He has often responded with aggressive rhetoric, blaming external forces or opposition figures for the country's problems. His public appearances can sometimes convey intense anger or defiance rather than a calm, problem-solving demeanour. Even Ayatollah Ali Khamenei of Iran exemplifies resistance to feedback and a profound focus on control. Protests are often brutally suppressed, and dissidence is met with harsh penalties, indicating a leadership that prioritises adherence to its ideology and power above all else, with little empathy for the people's demands for change. Part 3. Philosophers across history, from ancient Greece to modern times, have grappled with the nature of tyrannical and authoritarian rule. While they didn't use the modern psychological term emotional IQ, their observations often describe aspects of what we now understand as a lack of emotional maturity, empathy, and self-awareness in such leaders. In his Republic, Plato offers a scathing psychological portrait of the tyrannical man. He argues that such a soul, mirroring the tyrannical state, is utterly enslaved by its lawless, unnecessary desires, particularly a singular, powerful eros, desire for bodily pleasure and power. Plato sees the tyrannical man, as opposed to his ideal philosopher king, as driven by irrational appetites, completely lacking in self-control and devoid of reason's guiding hand. This directly implies a profound emotional immaturity where base desires override any higher faculties. Aristotle views a tyrannical leader as a degeneration of monarchy, where the ruler acts for their own benefit rather than the welfare of the state. This implies a self-centeredness that would naturally limit empathy and broad emotional understanding of the populace. Tyrants, in Aristotle's view, rely on fear to maintain power, rather than on the loyalty or affection of their subjects. This suggests a ruler who understands fear as a powerful lever, rather than seeking to foster trust or positive emotional connections. A tyrant, for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, is emotionally immature in the sense that they are driven by their own selfish desires and whims, private will, rather than genuinely understanding or serving the collective needs and desires, general will of the people. Hannah Arendt's analysis of tyrants, particularly in the origins of totalitarianism, and her work on Nazi Holocaust organiser Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, offers profound insights into the emotional and intellectual deficits of those involved in authoritarian systems. Arendt famously coined the phrase the banality of evil to describe Eichmann. She wasn't suggesting he lacked intelligence, but that he displayed a profound thoughtlessness, an inability or unwillingness to think from the perspective of others. He lacked the ability to imagine the consequences of his actions for other human beings. Part 4. Psychologists have done a fair amount of research on the authoritarian personality and the psychological profiles of authoritarian leaders, often highlighting significant deficits in emotional maturity and emotional intelligence. This field of study gained prominence after World War II in an effort to understand the psychological underpinnings of fascism and totalitarianism. Contemporary psychological research frequently links authoritarian leaders to traits within the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. As discussed previously, narcissism is central. Psychologists like W. Keith Campbell and Joshua D. Miller describe narcissistic individuals as having a grandiose sense of self, a constant need for admiration, and a profound lack of empathy. Machiavellianism involves a cynical view of human nature, a willingness to manipulate and deceive others, and a focus on self-interest. Machiavellian leaders are emotionally detached from the moral implications of their actions. They see emotions in others as tools to be exploited. Some authoritarian leaders exhibit psychopathic traits, which include a profound lack of empathy, remorse and guilt, impulsivity and superficial charm. Psychologists like Robert Hare, known for the PCLR checklist for psychopathy, describe psychopaths as social predators who understand emotions conceptually but do not feel them in a normal way. This enables them to commit atrocities without emotional distress. Research by scholars like Nyantoros 2020 has linked strongman leaders to higher scores on dark triad traits, particularly psychopathy. Psychologists note that authoritarian leaders often engage in black and white or dichotomous thinking. This cognitive rigidity is intertwined with emotional inflexibility, making them unable to process complex social realities or nuanced emotional responses. Research suggests that individuals with authoritarian tendencies may suppress anxiety related to inconsistencies or difficult truths. This emotional suppression hinders self-reflection and a realistic assessment of situations. Part 5. It's widely accepted that authoritarian leaders generally lack emotional intelligence. However, some lesser known and surprising facets of this dynamic emerge when you dig a bit deeper into psychological research. Lower EI predicts authoritarian leanings, even in adolescence and across the political spectrum. It's not just that authoritarian leaders have low EI. Studies are showing that adolescents with lower cognitive and emotional abilities are more likely to hold authoritarian attitudes, regardless of whether those attitudes lean traditionally right-wing or are expressed as left-wing authoritarianism. This suggests a fundamental psychological predisposition rooted in emotional and cognitive deficits that predate formal leadership roles. This challenges the common assumption that authoritarianism is solely a product of specific political ideologies. Emotional contagion is a factor that can be manipulated. While authoritarian leaders may lack genuine empathy, they are often adept at leveraging emotional contagion, the unconscious spread of moods and emotions, for their own purposes. They don't feel the emotions of their followers in an empathetic sense, but they understand how to trigger specific emotions like fear, anger, or even manufactured enthusiasm to control the narrative. It's a calculated use of emotional influence, not a genuine connection. Cognitive rigidity is deeply intertwined with emotional deficits. It's not just about what they feel, or don't feel, but also how they think. Authoritarianism is strongly linked to cognitive rigidity and an intolerance of ambiguity. They see the world in absolute black and white terms: good, evil, loyal, traitor. This rigid thinking makes them resistant to new information, alternative perspectives, and any feedback that challenges their worldview. This cognitive inflexibility reinforces their emotional inability to adapt or empathize, creating a closed loop of self-reinforcing certainty. In a 2014 study by Lauren E. Duncan and Billy Peterson, the psychologists showed that authoritarians process ambiguous visual information slower, holding on to initial perceptions longer, suggesting this rigidity extends to basic perceptual processes. Their confidence masks profound insecurity, but it's still dangerous. While authoritarian leaders project an image of unwavering confidence and strength, often driven by narcissism, psychologists suggest this outward display often masks deep-seated insecurities or feelings of powerlessness from childhood experiences. The relentless pursuit of control and dominance can be seen as an overcompensation for these underlying vulnerabilities. However, this doesn't make them less dangerous. In fact, the fragility of their ego makes them all the more ruthless in crushing anything that threatens their perceived self-importance. Part 6. It's a tough pill to swallow. Again, radiation poisoning anyone. But research consistently shows that authoritarian leaders, whether from history or today, often score low on the emotional intelligence scale. They might be strategic and intelligent in certain ways and certainly driven, but their lack of empathy, poor emotional regulation, limited self-awareness, resistance to feedback and obsessive need for control inevitably leads to suffering, crushing oppression, and a fearful population. So what does this mean for us? When you see a leader eroding the rule of law, silencing critics, or demonizing minorities, don't just see a political figure. See the chilling psychological profile of someone whose capacity for human connection lags behind the rest of us, leaving only the hunger for absolute control. And ask yourself, is this the future we want? If not, then shout out loudly and fight against this tyranny. If this deep dive into the minds of authoritarian leaders got you thinking, and you want to explore more philosophical and psychological insights into power and human nature, make sure to check out our next video popping up on your screen right now.